a head-on compass.
I was around in the times when I needed to heal from this very difficult cancer in what were the pioneering days of mind-body medicine. I never saw a contradiction between the Christian view and the Eastern view. I sort of added the two together and got a paradigm that worked for me.
Hello there, thank you for joining me. As we explore one of the questions I suppose at some point we all ask, what makes a good life? It's a challenge we've put to three well-known Australians who, as you'll see over the coming weeks, offer very different ideas about good health, good living and good deeds. Appearing in our first program is Ian Gawler. Ian is a pioneer of integrated medicine, healing that takes the body, the mind and the spirit into account. It's made him a controversial figure over the past 30 years.
I think the best definition I can think of a good life is a conscious life. You know, where you're actually awake, as opposed to, you know, going to sleep and missing it. What being awake means is to actually be more present, to actually be paying attention to what you're doing now. It's sort of about where your attention is. So if I'm planting cauliflowers in the garden, I'm giving the cauliflowers my full attention, or if I'm with somebody who's got a major illness, I'm giving them a full attention, or if I'm at home in bed with my wife, I'm giving her my full attention.
Ian Gawler has defied the medical odds. 3 decades ago, he was diagnosed with a cancer, then considered a death sentence.
I was a 24-year-old veterinarian, decathlon athlete, very fit. Thought I was very well. Thought I'd strained a muscle in my right leg through my athletics. But in fact, the strain in that leg persisted and the leg started to swell, and when I had it investigated, it turned out that I had a osteogenic sarcoma, which is a particularly aggressive form of bone cancer. The treatment of choice was to have my leg amputated through the hip, which was done in the beginning of 1975, and effectively that changed my life completely.
Ian's thoughts are revealed in the journal he kept while in hospital. In the hours immediately before his surgery, he wrote,
Wednesday, January the 8th, 1975. To my leg. How well you've served me for nearly 25 years. I remember long treks through the mountains of Gippsland and how you led the way to jump over 6 feet 4. That soaring feeling you gave rise to as you swept up into the air, leading the rest of my body into flight. That you are to be lost to me in a few hours leaves me feeling empty. Pretty well all the things I was involved in, pretty well all the things I was passionate about became impossible. I couldn't do athletics. In my veterinary work, I was particularly keen on working with horses. That became impossible. And so it was like a mini death, really, because the life I was living came to an end, and I was faced with, how do I reconstruct my life, or how do I start a new life?
The end of Ian's old life was a time of much soul-searching. fuelled by the conviction that he'd brought his cancer on himself.
For me, there was a real constant existential dilemma in that. I'd go off to the bank at the end of the week and I'd be putting lots of money in the bank from all this hard work I'd been doing, but there was this other little voice in me saying, yes, but what have you actually done that's meaningful or of spiritual significance in your life? So the illness, for me, served as a real reminder, actually, to rekindle that spiritual focus in my life, and that actually gave the whole thing meaning and purpose.
Faced with one of the biggest tests of his life, Ian first looked to his Christian faith. So how do you think your Anglicanism helped you specifically get over the shock of discovering how ill you were?
Not much at all, actually. I think that's the point. The very simplistic sort of Christian view I had at the time, Sunday school sort of view, it's just like say your prayers and be a good boy and everything's going to be okay. That didn't fit my life at all.
So what did you decide to change about your practice of life?
Well, I was very fortunate because I'd heard a lot about meditation in the past and I'd been interested in it, and I took a book with me into hospital, Chogram Trungpa's Meditation in Action, and so I read that, and that got me started with meditation. And the other thing was I took the Bhagavad Gita with me and I read that, and that spoke to me very much of this existential dilemma and the question about how do you live in a secular world with a spiritual view.
So would you say that prayer and spiritual focus played a role in your recovery or not?
Oh, very much so. Yeah, I mean, that's the point. For me, I never saw a contradiction between the Christian view and the Eastern view. I sort of added the two together and got a sort of a paradigm that worked for me, which through my illness, actually, I probably got more comfort and more strength from my Christian connection than sort of my interest in sort of, the Hindu or the Buddhist traditions.
A year after sacrificing his leg, the cancer resurfaced in other parts of Ian's body. Large bony growths distorted his pelvis, spine and left lung, leaving him in constant pain. His doctor said he had only 3 to 6 months to live. But Ian couldn't accept this grim prognosis.
Being a veterinarian was a bit like a double-edged sword because on the one hand I'd got this profound respect for animals' ability to heal themselves and thought, well, that could work for me. But on the other hand, I had the medical paradigm, and I'd operated on dogs with osteogenic sarcoma, the same cancer that I had. I'd taken their legs off and I'd seen the cancer reoccur and I'd see them die very quickly after that happened. So I was around in the times when I needed to heal from this very difficult cancer in what were the pioneering days of mind-body medicine. And despite, again, the fact that as a veterinarian I was actually trained in nutrition, for me to grapple with the idea that while conventional medicine couldn't cure me, perhaps changing the way I ate, meditating, using the power of the mind, that could help me to get well. That was actually quite a hurdle to overcome, and that took a long time.
An article in Melbourne's Age newspaper brought Ian into contact with one of the pioneers of mind-body medicine, psychiatrist Dr. Ainsley Mears.
I think he was just an extraordinary man, so far ahead of his time. He was the first senior medical figure to recognise the therapeutic benefits of meditation and to devote his medical life to that. And I was very fortunate to meet him at a time where he was prepared to go public with the notion that intense meditation might help people to recover from cancer.
What I'm trying to do is to have people meditate, less tension, less anxiety, less cortisone, and the immune system is freer to work.
Ainsley Mears introduced me to meditation in a therapeutic context. And I only spent about 6 weeks with him at the time of my illness. And then after I recovered, I saw him quite regularly, and he became a major mentor and a guide in the development of the work I've been doing since.
But the turning point in Ian's recovery occurred when he was still very ill and seeking answers a long way from home. In India, he met Sai Baba, said to be a reincarnated Hindu saint. How would you summarise the impact of Sai Baba on you?
Well, it was profound, and it came at the culmination of a whole lot of experiences that led up to it. So
What happened?
called in for an interview, then this sort of very disarmingly brief but poignant conversation, the key words of which were, "You're already healed, don't worry." And those words catalysing or clarifying the dilemma I was in, where I thought it was possible to get well but having doubt about it, and being helped through that experience to come away with a clarity of conviction that I really would get well.
Ian Gawler came home confident that he would recover. A year later, he was declared cancer-free.
One of the things that really confounded me when I got well back in 1978 was I went back to some of my original doctors and I said, "Look at this, fancy this, you know, here I am, I'm still alive, and even better, the cancer's gone." And you know what happened? Instead of saying, "Wow, that's really interesting, what did you do?" they got angry with me. And it was incredible. It was as a veterinarian, it was like stunning. You know, if I did that in my veterinary practice, I'd think I must be nuts and I wouldn't have a practice. But these people thought it was better to get angry with me because in their view, I got well for the wrong reasons. You know, I'd gone off and changed my diet and meditated instead of being dutiful and dying on time.
Ian had tried everything. Alternative therapies such as diets, colonics and acupuncture, through to meditation and even faith healing in the Philippines. Given all the alternative therapies you tried, how can you be sure what cured you?
In my particular case, it's hard to be clear about what actually were the definitive issues. But I guess having worked in this field for 30 years and having my own personal experience, so sort of like having a personal experience and a clinical experience, I think it is possible to look at people, say, if we're interested in who recovers from difficult cancers, and say there are recurring themes.
In 1978, Ainsley Mears wrote up Ian's case for the Australian Journal of Medicine. Soon Ian found himself in demand. He began workshops to share his experiences with other cancer sufferers.
I think that the question that most cancer patients find themselves asking when they first have a diagnosis of cancer is, why me?
Your own sort of
3 decades later,
set of conditions
his
about what
approach
you have to do
remains
to get well. So it
essentially
might
the
be you've got to
same.
have some, if you think there's only a small chance I'm going to get well, but that's the focus of what you're doing, and say you've changed your diet with the thought that I'm going to get well. And cancer's clearly a multifactorial chronic degenerative disease. So multifactorial means that it's not just one thing. There's not just one virus. There's not just one thing in our food. And I think really it's both physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, all those things can impact on cancer. What makes it such an extraordinary disease in many ways. And it involves actually a weakening of our own immune systems.
Ian is Therapeutic Director of the Gawler Foundation's residential facility in Victoria's Yarra Valley. He and his doctor wife Ruth lead a team helping people with cancer and other serious illnesses.
Understanding that cancer is a chronic, multifactorial degenerative disease really directs us to how we need to manage it really effectively. It's more than just taking account of what can be done medically. It's like, how can we restore the health within our own system so that we actually have a regenerative process going on within our body? And we do that, again, through building a healthy lifestyle. And what I could say is I think quite a lot of people who've got well have actually gone through that transition from belief to faith. You know, I think for me, I'm talking about an inner process, actually. So when I'm talking about faith, the faith I'm talking about is an inner state of mind. It involves having this confidence in what you're doing. If you have a doubt, it sort of grabs you, you know, and it sort of rattles you around for a while before it sort of lets you go. And you know, often those... One of the real tragedies of the cancer work I'm involved in is that many of the people who come to our groups have actually been given bad news badly. And by that I mean their doctors have actually told them that they're in a difficult situation. But in doing so, they've painted a picture that actually takes these people's hope away. And it seems like for some people in the medical profession, if there's a poor prognosis, they have the notion that it's better to actually be direct, you know, be what they regard as truthful. But what can tend to happen is they emphasise the negative possibilities rather than the positive possibilities.
It's the possibility of survival that needs more emphasis, according to Ian Gawler, and more research.
This is a labyrinth. How many of you have seen a labyrinth before? Just a few. So nobody is seriously studying the long-term survivors. And what a waste of money that is. You know, here's one of the greatest resources available to people who are freshly diagnosed with cancer, is the people who actually managed to do well with it and are still alive, and nobody's studying it. One of the nice things about it is that you come to these sort of little dead ends, as it were. You know, you're going along one direction and you have to turn and change. So it's quite a nice metaphor for how in life, you know, you try something and then you go along for a while and you have to move around and change direction and do something else. Nobody's ever come to me from a research point of view and said, Ian, what the hell did you do? Perhaps we should look at your DNA, you know, perhaps something's happened that we can learn from. I'm the one who's had to do that. I'm going to get out and confront the medical profession, you know, in days gone by.
If you were diagnosed with cancer tomorrow, would you put your life in the hands of orthodox medicine and all that involves, or would you go to someone like Ian Gawler, who won't use drugs, he's not trained, he's not registered, but he can produce for you a lot of people who would claim to have been cured by him?
On the one hand, you may have very uncomfortable treatment that has a predictable chance of success. On the other hand, you're being offered treatment that is much, much more comfortable, with grandiose claims for efficacy that cannot be supported.
He lists his type of treatment as being quite non-toxic, whereas, as opposed to medical treatments which he lists as toxic, whereas in fact some of the treatments which he offers have considerable potential for doing harm.
To meditate, to relieve stress, to alter the immune system is not going... I mean, the evidence does not support the fact that that will lead to control of breast cancer, lung cancer or colon cancer.
Perhaps we haven't got the explanation right because we haven't studied it enough, and perhaps meditation is working through some other mechanism. But I think
what's changed, would you say, in your relationship with the orthodox medical profession in, say, the last 20 years?
Quite a lot, actually. I mean, one of the delightful things is that meditation's been accepted very widely on the merits of the clinical experience of people who've seen the benefits of what happens when people meditate regularly and the great body of research that's been done. I think it's remarkable how underplayed the benefits of a lifestyle program are for people with cancer.
Well, it's not really accepted generally or as a lifestyle disease, is it? I mean, conventional...
Oh, of course it is, without a doubt.
You've got no doubt, but conventional medicine...
Oh, no, conventional medicine does too, absolutely. I mean, if you look at the the causes of cancer in the conventional medicine, it's about 75% lifestyle related. You know, what we eat accounts for about a third of all the cancers. Smoking accounts for another third. So that's, you know, like you're up to 65% already. Then you put in the environmental factors and, you know, lack of exercise and lack of sunlight and things like that. You get up to 75, 80%. What is more controversial is the role of lifestyle in recovery from cancer. And, you know, the evidence for that's really growing, and I would say it's quite compelling. I think it's very reasonable to say that in a most modest level, if people have what you regard as a really unhealthy lifestyle compared to a healthy lifestyle, their healthy lifestyle would double their life expectancy in terms of how long they'll survive a cancer diagnosis.
Ian, how would you describe the integration of conventional therapies and surgical intervention with alternative methods when it comes to cancer?
Oh, I'm a very strong believer in integrative medicine, Geraldine, which recognises the benefit of conventional medicine but is happy to question it. So integrative medicine takes the best of conventional medicine, adds to that what can be done through natural therapies, adds to that what can be done through the individual's own efforts. Just let your eyes close gently.
Developing a healing lifestyle is the focus of the program delivered at the Yarra Valley Living Centre. Using diet as therapy, improving relationships, and most importantly of all, cultivating peace of mind. It's a program about living well, no matter how much time is left.
The sad truth is, for some people with cancer, the time between their diagnosis and their death is just a misery. You know, they're really fearful, they're really anxious, they have trouble communicating, they don't say the things they'd like to the family. There's just distress all around them, and the whole thing can, you know, in the worst case scenario, be really unfortunate, really unpleasant. By contrast, if people are helped and they actually learn what they can do to make the best of that situation, they can actually learn to complete their life and to die with a sense of fulfilment and with a sense of inner peace. And the curious thing is, if that's the case for the person who's got the illness, it tends to flow into the people around them. And so it encourages communication, it encourages the sense that we can say to this person that we love the things that are important. And sure, it's still disappointing. There may still be a sense of regret that the person's died, but there's this real acceptance of it, there's this real acknowledgement that it's gone as well as possible, and people are actually left with a good feeling, and often quite inspired, in fact, by the whole process, and the knowledge that it is possible to die well.
Do you ever concern yourself that in encouraging people to hope to live, you may be actually stopping them prepare for death?
I don't think there's any contradiction in hoping to live and preparing for death, Geraldine. I think, in fact, the best way to live a good life is to be prepared for death and to see death as a friend, because I think if you actually take death seriously, then it informs your life, because it helps you to recognise two fundamentals in life. One is it's incredibly precious, and the other is it's incredibly fragile.
So this issue of wellness, training yourself in wellness. Now again, I've heard people say it's terrific, but as people get older, they get set in their ways. And how much realistically can you ask people to alter their lifestyles?
And the tragedy is most people know what a healthy lifestyle is, and so many people aren't actually following it. So I think it's a matter of people trying to get clear on what they're really interested in, actually, and then if they do want to be healthy and well, thinking about what's actually the problem, what's the root problem, and the root problem's the mind. It's our mental state and the emotional overload that's affecting the judgment and what we do in daily life. So let's have a look at this extraordinary tree. It's a red oak. And if you didn't know anything about the laws of biology, you'd look at it and you'd think, gosh, where did that come from? How was that made? Who built it? And again, if you didn't know anything about the laws of biology and I was to show you this, and I was to tell you that this actually produced that, well, I don't know, if you didn't know the laws of biology, you'd think I was nuts. But because we know that if you plant an acorn, you can see it grow into a little tree and then a bigger tree. If you wait for nearly 100 years, you can have a tree like that. And so it's a bit like that with your mind. You know, if you don't know the laws of your mind, you see things happening around you and you think, well, how did that happen? But if you actually know the laws that govern your mind, you can take a small idea and you can plant it. And if you know how to look after it, if you know how to nurture it, you know how to protect it, you know how to help it to grow, then quite extraordinary things can come out of just the seed of your mind. So for a lot of people, what I'm talking about is what's described as mindfulness, which is this capacity to use your mind to give full attention to what you're doing in a way that's quite deliberate and non-judgmental. And what that means is that you actually get the full benefit out of whatever you're doing. You don't miss it. It's like you actually get the full experience of each moment of your life. I think there's a real value in marking important things in our lives by a ritual. So this is another really interesting tree, and I really love planting trees for all the obvious reasons. And this one was actually planted to commemorate, I guess, the 30th anniversary of having had my leg amputated. So when Ruth and I were planting this tree, we had a young puppy involved, and in his exuberance and enthusiasm to be a part of this ritual, he managed to jump on the tree and break it off. So it's really quite eloquent, I think, that if you look at the base of the tree now, you can see where that break occurred and where the tree regrew. I guess it speaks to something of what happened in my own life with a limb being amputated and then new growth coming out of that. The fact that it actually looks like a dog leg seems to me to have quite a sense of humour to it as well. It's sort of like that sort of sense of a cosmic joke being involved. So for myself, I can look back and say, well, there's so much good that's come out of my illness. But if you ask me, well, would I rather have 2 legs? That's a really difficult one. Because really what I would have liked was to have learnt these lessons without having to go through the illness, without having to have the loss of the leg, without all that went with that. And if there's a message that comes really clearly out of people dealing with major difficulties in their life, it's to the people who are well to say, wake up. You've got this wonderful life, you've got this wonderful opportunity. Don't miss it, don't waste it. Do the best you can with it. And one of the ways to do that is to be reminded that you could die at any time. Death's a real friend when you take it seriously, because it makes you realise that you may not have forever. Why not use this precious moment that you've got now to best advantage?